Joined now by the national sports editor of the Daily Hive and their Offside Sports vertical. It's Rob, the hockey guy. Rob Williams back here with Sekeres and Price. Rob, how are you?
Doing great, fellas. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, fantastic. I know you'll turn to Rob, the basketball guy, here in a couple of weeks after being Rob, the soccer guy, for the last couple of weeks. But we're going to start with the Vancouver Canucks, or at least hockey. And one province to the east, Connor McDavid's agent, Jeff Jackson, is now in charge of the Edmonton Oilers. Many there believe that means that McDavid is going to re-sign there in a few years when his contract is up. I mean, lots could happen between now and then. But assuming he's a lifetime Oiler, Rob, are the Canucks ever going to get through him in the playoffs?
Sure, maybe.
Boy, that was confident, wasn't it?
You know what? That has a lot more to do with the Vancouver Canucks than it does Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers. I mean,
good answer.
Teams got by Wayne Gretzky and the Flames got by the Wayne Gretzky Oilers in the 80s. So I
Thanks
think that
to Steve Smith, the Kings did with a comeback for the ages, and well, that's about it.
Exactly, right? So, no, I don't think the Oilers will be unbeatable, particularly in a salary cap world where you only have so much money to spend, and McDavid's next contract's not going to be cheap. Same with Leon Draisaitl. I don't think they'll be unbeatable. I'm more concerned about the other side of it is, can the Canucks put together a team that can, make it to a Western Conference final? Maybe, right? I mean, they have to make the right moves. I think I think at least under this management team, like I was looking at I wrote a piece this week looking at the 11 free agent mistakes the Canucks have made in the biggest free agent and most costly free agent mistakes they've made in their history. And it was basically like Jim Benning's greatest hits, right? Like it was filled with Benning signings. At least under this management group, at least they seem to be steering away from that a little bit. They're not making as many egregious mistakes in that regard, and they seem to be adding some pieces. But of course, there's still a long way to go.
It's an interesting approach by the Oilers, though. I mean, that has to speak to some insecurity they had about Connor McDavid leaving, huh? That they would bring in their agent.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't you be insecure if you're Edmonton? Remember Roberto Luongo when he had 1 year remaining when he first came to Vancouver and signed that, before he signed that big contract that turned out to be, the contract that sucks, right? But before he signed that, remember people in Vancouver were freaking out that he wasn't going to re-sign with the Canucks. Mm-hmm. And I can only imagine what it's like in Edmonton because if they lose McDavid, it all crumbles, right? And there's always talk about people not wanting to play in Edmonton. So if the greatest player on the planet, I mean, he can choose his destination. I guess it depends on his mental makeup, and is he happy in Edmonton? Is that the place for him? I guess we have no reason to believe otherwise at the moment. But I think it's probably going to depend a lot on, are they able to ice a contender?
Do you think Draisaitl stays? Because they're back up the Brinks truck for McDavid, but do they have money left over to pay Draisaitl what he needs?
I mean, it depends what the salary cap looks like in a few years, and I think it will look a little bit different. And yeah, I think if you're Edmonton, you pay McDavid and Draisaitl whatever they want, and you figure out the rest after that.
Agreed. They got the Nuge on a very team-friendly deal, 5.125, or at least it is now. It is a long-term deal, so it may not age well. Hyman's on a $5.5 million deal. Evander Kane's on the same deal as Nugent Hopkins. Draisaitl 2 more years at 8.5. McDavid 3 more years at 12.5. Did you hear that answer, Grady? It has more to do with the Vancouver Canucks. Teams got by Wayne Gretzky. That's why he's Rob the hockey guy and why he's here every Thursday with Sekeres and Price.
And what do the Canucks have that the Oilers don't? Goaltending. Or at least more established. We can see what Skinner will become, but I'm more confident.
5-6 good games from Thatcher Demko could be all the antidote you need for
exactly. And the Oilers are plowing 7.6 million into goaltending for the next 3 years with Campbell and Stewart, both on deals with 3 years. Campbell's got 4 years left. Stuart Skinner's got 3. So Oilers goaltending and how they're investing in that position, something to watch going forward, not to mention the 9.25 for Darnell Nurse, which runs through the entirety of the decade. Rob, saw you wrote about Ethan Bear and his nuptials over the weekend, and the province has written about him where he says, look, I'd love to be back, but Alvin's told me he's got to clear cap space. And I suppose if that's the answer to Ethan Bear, that's probably the answer for a lot of other players on the Canucks wish list.
Yeah, I think that's it's an interesting comment because you think about Patrick Alvin strikes me as, in his time here is so cagey, right? Like, think back to like his comments on buyouts, and he was sort of like, and then he ends up buying out OEL, and it was sort of like, okay, you kind of you look back at the quote and start picking it apart and go, okay. And I think he's certainly the cagiest GM we've had since Mike Gillis in Vancouver. So I think, okay, yeah, they want him back, but they have to clear cap space. I mean, that's a major stumbling block. And I also wouldn't put it past Alvin that, okay, we want you back, but we have to clear cap space. But if we clear cap space, we might want someone else instead. So I don't think it's a matter of just that. The part that's interesting for me, though, is don't you get the sense that Ethan Bear really wants to play in Vancouver and that this is really kind of a destination he would prefer? That's the interesting part for me, where I think they might have the potential to get him on a real hometown discount, particularly if there's not much interest around the league. I don't think he's going to, give up, more than $1 million or something like that to come to Vancouver. But I do think that
a 1 year 1.5 or something like that. I mean,
I think that's totally within the realm of possibility. And is that 1.5 is is that prorated based on missing 2 months of the season? I think there's a world where we could see Ethan Bear back in Vancouver, but I think it's going to take some time, and I think that we could see if he remains unsigned. I mean, of course, he's got time; he can wait this out until December. Once teams start having injuries on the back end, all of a sudden cap space opens up, and maybe there's a spot for Ethan Bear to return.
Speaking of good signings, the Whitecaps making a ton of news here in the last 24 hours. They're in a good playoff spot already. The Lions are in a great playoff spot right now, in a massive game tonight that could even solidify their season further. Those two teams are doing everything right now. But are they the same fan base as the Vancouver Canucks? Do you think it has any correlation to Canuck expectations? And what's the interaction of these two seasons, these two good seasons so far for these two clubs versus what the Vancouver Canucks are about to embark on?
Yeah, I think they're all three. I think are in very different situations in terms of where they are in the market. I mean, the Canucks are always king in Vancouver, so they're always going to have the attention on them. And I think people are just desperately want them to have meaningful games in December, I guess, right? So I think there's always the attention on the Canucks. They're in a world by themselves. The Whitecaps and Lions, it's so interesting how those two franchises have operated in this market since the Whitecaps entered MLS in 2011. I think the Whitecaps had a long honeymoon where they were
riding the atmosphere,
average to good, but but people just love the atmosphere. They love coming to games, and the scandals and the team falling apart really hurt the brand, I think, and they've had to build it up, and it's a slow build coming back right now. To get them back to where they were within the market, I think. And I think that the two signings, I agree. I love, not just two guys from the Canadian national team, but two fairly important players on the Canadian national team. This isn't Lucas Cavallini sitting on the bench, right? This is two players that played big roles in then getting to the World Cup. Also, two, I don't know if they're character guys, but like guys with like personalities, right? Like
Richie's prickly, you know, he's
yeah. I mean, he was you know, during qualifying, like he rode the line between like getting ejected, getting a red card, like often. Like he was the guy right in the mix every time they were playing these Central American teams, and there were like, you know, pushing and shoving. He was always in the center of things. So I think that's great. Sam Adekugbe, of course, they need to like set up like a pile of snow maybe at BC Place to give him the Adekugbe Canadian celly.
Sam's Hill. Yeah,
exactly.
He's like the Alex Burrows to the Canadian men's national team.
Yeah, we got Willie's corner. We can add Sam's Hill on the other side maybe. Yeah. So I think that, you know, so often when there's signings in MLS, you know, you start like Googling the guy to figure out like what league was he playing in.
Is he any good really? Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's so hard. It's so hard to know where it's, these are two players that I think we can be genuinely excited about the Whitecaps adding, and they're actually, you know, players that we've heard of and have seen play with our own eyes. In terms of the Lions, I think they've gone, you know, the Lions were in a place before where I would say it was really interesting. Like the casual fan wasn't just apathetic to them, like actively disliked them. It was sort of my feel on what the Lions were, you know, in most of the last 10 years, where it was just people just did not care. And Amar Doman has completely flipped the script, and he has made the Lions into something that I think the casual fan now is like. You ask them about I think if you stop people on the street and ask them about the BC Lions and what do you know about them, they'd say, oh, they got that great new owner who's doing all these good things, and they probably tell you LL Cool J, and they're not saying, oh, nobody cares, nobody goes to the games, and that's what they used to be saying. And you know, attendance for the Lions is on the rise, and more than that, just the feeling in the market, like people like the Lions again, right? Like even if they don't watch many of the games, even if they couldn't tell you many of the players, the feeling has just changed around the Lions, and Amar Doman has everything to do with that, combined with the team, you know, doing their part as well and winning games on the field and putting an entertaining product on the field. So I think that's sort of my feel on how those franchises have gone.
I have a bone to pick with Williams here in a second, but first. Full disclosure, and I hope I'm not speaking out of school, Rob, but when we first started this arrangement with the content share, Sekeres and Price, Rob being on the show and Rob taking some of our editorials to the Daily Hive and Offside, he said to me, Matt, I hate to break it to you, but if you're right about the Lions, we're probably not going to pick it up because it just doesn't resonate with our audience. And I want to say 2 weeks ago I did it at Welcome Matt on Amar Doman. And guess who picked it up, Blake? Rob Williams and Offside.
Traction, yes.
It's totally changed. Honestly, like it used to be the case where, like, I grew up a Lions fan. I like the Lions. I like the Whitecaps. You know, I like the Canucks. Well, I like love the Canucks. You know, like
it's almost like I used to like the Canucks, but
you know, like look, it's good for. I know people always say like people in the media are so negative and we just want to like pick the teams apart. I mean, it kills the media in this market with having all the teams be so terrible. I mean, what's good for the media in Vancouver is if all of Vancouver's teams win a lot. Like that's the best thing. That's the best thing for us, right? Like that's good for business. So, yeah, I mean, the Lions. I used to try covering the Lions probably more than I do now, and it was a tough sell, and that's changing quite a bit now. So like I think that's. I used to say, like, you know, if you knew nothing about the Lions or Whitecaps, like people just sort of liked the Whitecaps but didn't like the Lions, even if they never really watched either. And that's totally changing now. And like I say, Amar Doman is the feeling around the Lions is just totally different from what it used to be.
Okay, so here's the bone to pick. Did you say meaningful games in December for the Canucks?
Yeah, we've lowered the bar now.
Like, honestly, Rob, you're lowering the bar. Like, first of all, December's the easiest month to sell of them all because you get all the Christmas presents and Hanukkah gifts, and people are going just as a family experience.
And everybody's home from university and the like. Yeah.
It's March, Rob. We absolutely need the last full month of the NHL season to be meaningful. There you go, artificially lowering the bar for them again.
Guys, that just shows like where they've been the last few years. It's been unbelievable. I mean, just to have the season just fall apart immediately. Like at least the Willie Desjardins years, they had like a 500 record into like November, right? Like it's like they at least pretend for a little bit. Like
they had six mediocre weeks there.
I just need them to pretend for a little bit longer than usual.
Hey,
at the very least.
Good call, good phrase.
Before you go, big day for hoops fans as well. They learn of an NCAA tournament. They learn of Raptors game coming as well. The Raptors resonate right now? Will people be excited about that? I mean, the basketball community's there. Do you think people care?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This used to be a near annual visit from the Raptors, and I remember when they started visiting. I think they came 3 out of 4 years. Starting around 2015, and around that time, I wasn't paying much attention to the Raptors, and I remember seeing the scenes at Rogers Arena, and it wasn't just people coming out to support NBA, like there were Raptors fans coming out to cheer on the Raptors. And the championship in 2019, I think, has only served to strengthen that. I was there the last time they visited in 2018 when Kawhi Leonard first joined. The atmosphere was fantastic at Rogers Arena, and there's legitimate Raptors fans, and that's before they won the championship. So I think the team's not as strong as they used to be, so it's gone down a little bit in that regard. This would have been a real buzz if they had come right after winning the championship. But I think that those fans are still there, and there will be a buzz for this game.
It's funny because my friends, I have many friends in the restaurant business, and people like Jim Romer and Kelly Gordon of Romer's, and Chuck and Cameron over at the Pemberton station, told me that the Raptors NBA Finals run was like second to the Canucks 2011 run in terms of business it did for their bars with watch parties. I think we're at the stage now with the Raptors where you're starting to see them in the infancy of what Blue Jays fans were in the mid-'90s, that you effectively have a little bit of a Canada's team buzz going on because of the championship. Look, it's been long enough since the Grizzlies that I think, A, a lot of people have moved on. B, a lot of people are just too young to have remembered the Grizzlies. So I think you have a small-scale Canada's team support coast to coast going on for the Raptors, even if they're crappy, much like we see with the Blue Jays and have seen with the Blue Jays for the better part of 30 years.
Yeah, I don't even think it's necessarily small scale. I think it might be a bit generational. I think people in their teenagers and people in their 20s and probably a lot of people in their 30s probably a little bit as well. I mean, they don't really remember the Grizzlies, right? Like that's not that whole sourness is gone, and I think that young people tended to gravitate to the NBA a little bit more, and the Raptors are their team. That you turn on the television, like every Raptors game is on TV, and they've had good teams in the last decade. So I think there's probably a little bit of parallel to infancy of the Jays, like you say. But yeah, the Raptors are a big deal coast to coast, and they're a big deal in Vancouver as well. And I think, I know there's some anti-Toronto people that'll hate the Raptors forever, and that's fine.
And Jays too. We hear that too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I think that coming to Vancouver and playing these games and throwing the West Coast a bone like they have is really important in building that fan base up on this side of the country.
Absolutely.
If only BC Place could house baseball, because I bet you the Jays would do that too, especially with the affiliate out here as well. Like if it was a plug and play that you could just come out and play a couple of games here, I'm sure they would.
I know Andy Dunn and the Canadians have talked about amongst themselves that Blue Jays, remember they used to do the preseason game in Montreal before starting the season?
Yeah.
Having them come play at the Nat if you can get the field in good condition and if the Jays are starting on the West Coast. I mean, as it stands, Blue Jays games typically do a lot better than Raptors games on television, but as Rob notes, it's somewhat generational, so a lot of those young people could be watching the Raptors games not necessarily on basic cable. The events that I am awaiting on the Raptors is a Canadian invasion of the Rose Garden in Portland. If Canadian Raptors fans turn the Rose Garden into ACC West, if you will, then we will have a direct comparison.
Sonics will be there soon. Sonics are a couple of years away, so you do that too. Yeah.
Marvelous stuff, Rob Williams. Fantastic discussion today. Thanks for this. We'll catch up next Thursday.
Anytime. Thank you.
This clip brought to you by LiUNA 1611, BC Laborers Union. Check out 1611.ca.